All right. Now, last few lessons, we've been enduring the lectures on this essay, the hardest essay that you've ever done. Do we agree? Yeah? No? You think it's we want it harder? Hands up if yeah, I want it to be harder. Hands up. No. You want it to be? No, okay. It's pretty hard. But we did the hard work already. We worked out our thesis statement and our structure for our introduction. We identified our thematic concerns as being race as it's constructed within Australian literature texts. We did our first main body paragraph, which is our base, where we established Henry Lawson as a representation of 19th and early 20th century Australian literature, which is from an Anglo-centric perspective and validates colonisation and validates the European occupation and use of the land, and marginalises and dehumanises Aboriginal people. That's that perspective of Lawson. But that made life so much easier for us when we looked at our next two paragraphs where we compared that representation of Aboriginal people in texts like Lawson's with that of Jack Davis's, which is looking at race and power in Australia from the perspective of an Aboriginal person, somebody who has experienced the marginalisation, experienced the dehumanising. And then we were free to simply choose a representation from an Aboriginal perspective of a European. We decided that Neville was a really good option. And we also looked at the Aboriginal family, the Noongar family, and how they were represented to combat that idea that they had lost their culture and that they were somehow children. We looked at how they pushed back against the system. We looked at their humour. We looked at how he used Noongar language throughout the text in context as part of his approach to engaging in reconciliation, which is to educate the non-Aboriginal people in our community as to what Aboriginal culture is and what their experience is. So, we're now in the home run. All we've got to do is our conclusion, but conclusions are dangerous because conclusions are where you lose the A. Because people do things like, thank you for listening to thank you for reading my essay. You've got to be really careful. You don't really get marks for the conclusion usually, but you do lose them. So much like we looked at how we do an introduction to get as much in as we can without going off track, you also kind of have to do the same thing with a conclusion. So, get ready to write some notes. Again, think of it a bit as a triangle with three parts. Now, I should also mention that this is just one way of doing a conclusion. Just like the way we've done the essay so far, it's just one way of doing the essay. It's not the only way. But hands up if you have no idea about a structure of a conclusion. So that means people with their hand down do. So, Thomas, what's your idea about the structure of a conclusion?
Summarise what you've written.
Does that sound reasonable? You've just made someone read it.
Sure.
Yeah. Doesn't make sense when you think about it, does it? Summarise. I think it's the word summarise that's the problem. Yes?
Paraphrase your answer?
You can paraphrase. Paraphrase is better than summarise because that brings in the idea as a little bit more. But you don't, I've just read your essay. I spent 2 minutes on it. I read it. Probably about 5 minutes on this essay because it's going to be pretty dense. I don't want you to list again. Anyone got any other tips about conclusions that they might want to bring in? Because some of you had your hands down, so it means you know something about conclusions. No one? Oh, okay. Hands up if now you really would rather me just tell you what the structure of a conclusion is. Again, it is only one. You've gone far and wide at this point. That was very loud suddenly. You've gone far and wide at this point. You need to bring it back. This is the conclusion. For a start, you need to signal it's a conclusion. So you might use words like in conclusion or to conclude. These aren't the only ones. I do have some PowerPoints on your Moodle that give you other options as well. but you actually need to signpost. Just like we signpost throughout the essay when we were going to shift to a comparison, or we were going to support a point we've made in the next paragraph, you need to signal to your reader that they are now positioning themselves to come into your conclusion. It's part of making sure that they understand what they're reading so that they can engage with it strongly. Then you need to go back to your thesis. In this case, the idea that Australian literature is concerned with race. And we've taken it to power as well. Oh, I put an A there, that's bad. You need a sentence or two like that. Can I warn you, please do not word for word restate the thesis. Use different words. In the beginning, in the introduction, it was what you were going to do. Now it's what you've proven. There should be a shift in the language. It'll be very similar, but it won't be the same. If you had an element of questioning in the conclusion, this would be a good place for you to actually put it as a statement, something that's been achieved. But I leave that up to you.
Does it say that
Concerned with race and power.
Okay.
Yeah. I keep hearing something coming through that. Is that coming through there?
They've left it on.
I think we better turn it off before we learn too many things about the
No, I want to hear.
I know you do, but I don't want to be murdered as part of this. Wiping the slate clean. Here we go.
I would prefer to be murdered if I
No, you have to live the whole year. It's too entertaining.
But that's boring.
Oh, I'll do my best to make it not so. Now, people have said that we should summarise what is said. There is no purpose to that. But what you can do instead is say what the ideas prove or suggest. In our case, that there has been a shift in lit with representations. I know no one can read my writing. I kind of just write it for myself. Due to different groups writing. So say what the ideas prove or suggest through the shift in literature within representations due to different groups writing. That is summarising what you've discussed in your work. That is paraphrasing the ideas that have come through. You've spent 2 paragraphs writing it, but you haven't brought it together yet, and this is your point to do that. If you sit down and go, oh, they use characterisation, setting, symbolism to explore race, you haven't come to a conclusion. You're just relisting things that you've looked at. It's not really much. You want to show that you've engaged in the ideas. Do you want me to read that again? Okay. I'm fully aware of my handwriting. Say what the ideas prove or suggest that there's been a shift in literature with representations due to different groups writing. Because an Aboriginal Australian, Jack Davis, who is interested in reconciliation and engaging with non-Indigenous people, have begun to write about his experiences of race and his representations, that has resulted in a shift of our understanding through our literature. Race and power, the understandings change because we have more information. We have different information. We're not getting the same representations happening over and over again. That idea of the Aboriginal person who couldn't be trusted, the Aboriginal person who is a child, the mystical character that appears to help the white person. Now we're being presented with fully developed Aboriginal characters with culture, identity, family, and that shows us that there are flaws in the way that we've represented it before. You don't have to write all of that. If you wrote any of that, that would satisfy that part of the conclusion. There is a section on your marking keys to do with engagement. That is where the third part comes in. Show engagement. How it's relevant or needed for its impact. This should be only 1 to 2 sentences long because it's to conclude. This will indicate, this is the I statement section if you want to use it. Your perspective as Australians, your perspective as readers, as part of your society. Perhaps look to the future. But using an I statement and reflecting on it critically about the changes in your society, in your understanding, in your society's understanding, that will satisfy that part of the criteria that asks you to show engagement with the topic. Okay. So to give you a bit more idea about how much space, if that's 1 to 2 sentences, this is probably 2 to 3, and this is 1 to 2. And that'll get you out of your essay without losing any marks and potentially getting some others. Because as I said, it gets to prove that you have engaged with the topic, that you understand the ideas, and you're able to construct an argument. All 3 parts of your marking key. Now, take a moment, take some notes. I'll walk around the room and help you understand my handwriting, and then I'll ask you if there's any questions.